What's up guys, Nito here, and welcome back. So today I want to talk about the build that I've been playing in BPL, which is the Badger Private League. It's a big kind of like team-based private league event. Um, but basically I went in not really knowing exactly what I wanted to play. I just knew I wanted to mess around with Saboteur and the new Sunblast belt. So that's this belt right here, Sunblast. Skills which throw traps throw up to 2 additional traps. So it's basically a free cluster trap. But it says traps cannot be triggered by enemies, and traps from skills are thrown randomly around the target location, and it has 70 up to 75% reduced trap duration on it. So mine has 73%. So basically, traps normally have a duration of 4 seconds. So if you throw a trap on the ground without the belt on, it'll take 4 seconds for the trap to go off on its own. Or the enemy can step on the trap and that will trigger it immediately, right? So this makes it so the enemies can no longer actually step on your traps. You have to wait for the duration to run out, but the duration is much shorter. So it's only about a 1 second duration if you have a well-rolled Sunblast belt. So the other issue with this belt is that your traps will not target enemies. So any skill, like a projectile skill, for example, say you have like a fireball trap. I don't know why you would play fireball traps, but just for as an example, if you throw down your trap and it gets triggered by an enemy normally, as in the enemy like steps on the trap, the fireball will target that enemy because the enemy triggered it, right? But if you use Sunblast, the traps will fire off randomly in a random direction. You won't be able to control where your traps are aiming at effectively. So that's a pretty big downside of the Sunblast belt. But there is a way around that, and the way around that is basically to just hit the entire screen. So I am playing Toxic Rain traps, and as you can see, I throw traps in the middle of the screen, and stuff is landing like literally off screen, right? And I have a ton of AoE, and I have a bunch of extra arrows, and that's why Toxic Rain is basically has so much spread. But this results in a lot of overlapping damage over time areas. So like each one of these balls is basically has like a little damage over time aura around it. And because that kind of lasts for a bit of a duration, so let's see, my duration is currently 2.22 seconds. So because of that, even though the play style is basically like throwing down your traps and then waiting for a second for them to go off, because the trap is kind of persistent on the ground, it's actually a pretty smooth playstyle, because enemies that kind of like walk closer to you, even if they weren't really in the initial blast of your traps, are still going to get hit by all this AoE. And the other nice thing about Toxic Rain is that it slows enemies down. So each Spore Pod applies 5% less movement speed to nearby enemies, up to a maximum of 30%. And Toxic Rain is one of those skills that scales mainly off of levels. So right now mine is level 25, it's level 21 gem and a +3 bow. And then I have trap damage and chaos dot multi on the bow. And then using a carcass jack currently. This isn't really necessary, but it does make the clear really feel a lot better, just because without it, even though I do have quite a bit of AoE from being a Saboteur, you can see that the pods kind of land all closer together. So I'm not actually sure, but it may actually be better single target DPS to not have that extra AoE. Because the pods land closer together, but they also have a smaller area that each pod affects. So it's kind of hard to tell whether or not it's better or worse to have more AoE for a single target, but regardless, like, I'm doing pretty well in, I'm in tier 16 maps, doing Guardians and all that stuff, and haven't had that much trouble in terms of DPS. It's going pretty well. And I really didn't plan this build out at all. I pretty much just winged it, so I didn't really POB anything. I don't really know exactly how much DPS the build has. I would guess it's around 3 million or so at the moment, maybe a little more. 3 to 4, I would guess. It's a little bit dependent on like kind of how big the enemy's hitbox is and things like that. How, you know, whether or not they're stationary, because like against a stationary target you can usually hit them more frequently, um, and get them, you know, in range of the pods more easily. But this is the basic tree, though. It has actually quite nice defenses because, you know, we're sitting here on like 17k evasion, but then we have Wind Dancer, and we have this really nice, really underrated blind effect wheel. So this is giving us what? It's got 15, 15, 40, so that's 70, plus another 40% for the mastery, so that's 110% increased blind effect. And as a Saboteur, we get the Born in Shadows, like blind aura, and then blind on hit. So basically everything's blinded all the time. And yeah, blind causes 20% less accuracy and evasion for enemies. So it actually makes enemies easier to hit, and then it also gives them less evasion, or less, yeah, less accuracy. So you're harder to hit. And so that 20% net then becomes what, 44% with this, 44% less accuracy and evasion for enemies, which is quite a lot. Um, and yeah, just combined with like Wind Dancer and stuff, it's been really nice and just generally feels quite tanky. Um, that and, you know, spell suppression and all that stuff as well. And then, you know, we have the 50% increased AoE from our chain reaction here, as well as the AoE bow mastery, 20% AoE with bow skills. And I think we got a little more. Maybe that's it. Yeah. And yeah, so it's like 70% AoE on the tree, and then another 50% from the chest. And like the rest of the gear, you know, we have +1 Toxic Rain Arrow enchantment, just some dot multi and life and stuff on the quiver. Currently using Asenath's Gentle Touch, totally not necessary for the build. It just, you know, kind of makes clear a little smoother. And, you know, having Temp Chains Curse on hit. I also have Despair Curse on hit, so we're doing double Curse on hit. It's just a nice playstyle, and it basically adds on top of the slow from Toxic Rain. You get the move speed slow here, then you get the action speed slow from Temp Chains, and then you get even more slow from Skitterbots with the Chill Aura. So everything's just super slowed down, which makes it really nice to play with. I actually think that slows in general are kind of an underrated defense mechanic. You know, after my last build, I was playing Necromancer with 30% chill on basically the entire screen from corpses, and I just realized how incredible that is in terms of defense, because it really like makes it much easier to dodge everything. It makes you get hit just far less, and now I kind of want to just put big AoE slow in like pretty much all of my builds. And I'll just show you a map real quick and kind of like let you get a feel for how this actually looks when you're playing. So yeah, this is just like a random tier 16 Mud Geyser. But so you basically like, because there's that little bit of delay, you kind of like throw out your traps and then just keep moving, and like just know that everything, because the AoE is so gigantic, like everything's gonna die anyways, like even if it's behind you or whatever. And yeah, it's been like, I've been very surprised at how just good this build feels, just because, again, I literally didn't really plan on.
Just need a moment to catch
I didn't plan anything out, and I was actually originally planning on trying to do like poison caustic arrow traps or something, similar to the like poison caustic arrow Pathfinder build that I had done with ballistas. I wanted to try it on traps, and like I am using a, where is it? So I'm using Ballista, Caustic Arrow, Greater Volley, Withering Touch setup. So that's just applying Withered for us on bosses. So you just drop your totems and it'll do Withered. But yeah, actually, just to demonstrate real quick. So if I put Caustic Arrow in here instead of Toxic Rain, when you throw your traps, they fire in completely random directions, right? Like, even though the enemy's like over here, most of the traps are firing in, you know, the opposite direction, right? So, like, normally, like, that would cause issues. But with Toxic Rain, obviously, it just has such a nice AoE that it just covers the entire screen, and it just feels really good.
This way,
I'm just doing
exile.
some harvests. Let's see.
We need not the fruit,
And you know, you can't. The other thing to note about the Sunblast is that because you have a limit on the number of traps you can throw, and because you can no longer have enemies trigger your traps as soon as you throw them, you do have to be careful about not overthrowing. So, like, if I'm constantly throwing, if you have too much throw speed, your traps are just going to start replacing your other traps, your older traps basically, and you won't, and like they will just never trigger. So you have to be careful about not going too high on the throw speed, otherwise you'll have problems. But like, as you can see, you know, it just feels really good for clearing and for bossing and stuff. Just everything's super slow. Like you can just easily dodge the wave stuff. Coverage is obviously very nice. Why this guy's running away? But yeah, let me see if I can do a boss. We can do some essences. I have like fully juiced essences that I've been running without really any issues. As I say that, I sort of die, but like you can just throw your traps like way off screen, and you know everything eventually dies. And then the other thing I forgot to mention about the Sunblast belt is that because enemies are no longer technically triggering your traps, you can't really take advantage of things like charge generation on when your trap is triggered by an enemy. So that actually no longer works, which is kind of unfortunate. So just instead of that, I just use Frenzy. Once in a while, you just throw out a Frenzy. And, you know, even though I'm not really invested in accuracy very much, because the blind aura gives you so much bonus accuracy, it's kind of okay. And you can still hit stuff once in a while with Frenzy and with your Caustic Arrow for applying Withered. So, yeah, that blind I think is actually really undervalued. The blind effect wheel, if you're playing a Sabo, anyways. If you're not playing a Sabo, it's kind of not as nice. Like unless you, for some reason, have a really high chance to blind enemies. I guess maybe like you get some blind on Theater too, but I don't know if it's really worth it. But anyways, that was a double tier 16 boss right there, just kind of as an example and just what this looks like. And Bill has honestly been a blast to play, so yeah, check it out. I recommend check it out. Messing around with the Sunblast belt has been fun. I think it's like niche but powerful, and it's actually, I would say it's a little bit overpowered, to be honest, because if you look at the numbers on Cluster Trap support, and then you compare what you get from the Sunblast belt, it basically, like, you no longer have to run Cluster Trap, which is normally fairly mandatory on every trap build, right? So this is a level 20 Cluster Trap, which gives 55% less damage, and it gives you the throw up to 2 additional traps, which the Sunblast belt gives you. So you no longer have a 55% less modifier, and you freed up an extra support gem. So basically, like, you know, now you can fit in trap and mine damage or whatever for 50% more damage with 10% less throwing speed, which is honestly not that big a deal considering that we don't want to overinvest in throwing speed anyways. So it's like, it's, you know, something like 200 to 300% more damage using Sunblast belt. It's like, it's actually kind of nuts. But of course you have the downside of it not being able to target enemies, not being able to generate charges, things like that. So you do have to work around it a bit, but it's crazy powerful if you can. So I definitely think it's a cool item, because I like items that have like strong upsides and major downsides as well, you know? So yeah, that's the build. Hope you enjoyed. See you later.